Thank you, Maria, and thank you everybody that's joined, particularly those in Australia after the long weekend, and for those that are celebrating it before the Lunar New Year as well. So it's great to have you here and tell a bit of our story. We've been on a journey for a little while, and it's always a milestone when you get to share to communities like this. And we've certainly experienced the benefit of coming along to communities and hearing other stories, and I hope you get something out of our story today. A few lessons, a few learns, and I also hope that this isn't the last one we share as well. So we're on a journey that doesn't end. We're always trying to continue to do things better, and so hopefully we'll be back, myself or one of my other colleagues, to talk about some of the other stories as we progress on our journey. I'll maybe flip to the next slide. That works. There we go. Okay, awesome. Hopefully you can see that slide change, the introduction and agenda. So a quick introduction. My name is Graham Milne. I work for Optus. For those who aren't in Australia or those that don't know us, we're a major telco in the Australian area. We sell a whole bunch of different products from mobile through to fixed line. We put satellites up there for communications. We do wholesale. We also do entertainment areas in sport. So Optus Sport is one of the key products of ours, and we've been in this market for a long period of time. A little background on myself. I thank Maria for taking that photograph of LinkedIn. It reminds me I need to change it. That's a younger looking version of myself before probably a couple of transformations aged me. Yeah, I've basically my background, and if you can't tell a little bit from my accent, is I originally hail from the UK and Scotland. I started my career as a software engineer and worked there for many years on telco products before relocating to the other side of the world and Sydney, where I live with my family. I joined Virgin Mobile, which was an Optus subsidiary at the time, many years ago. And then navigated through various different roles to eventually lead all of the technology and delivery for Virgin. And that's where I grew a passion about how we deliver things and how we do that well. And that continued on. I had a stint across in the financial institutions, the CBA in Sydney as well, where my paths crossed with Mark Payne from SSH and Maria as they were on a journey transforming various areas within CBA and Bank West. Before returning back to Optus and on my current mission to try and help us as a company deliver better. And so we're going to share, and I'm going to share a little bit of that journey. In particular, there's one area that we have been focusing on over the last period of time, which is around quarterly planning, which was a key element of how we could make delivery better and more reliable across our company. And I'll talk a little bit about our journey through that and what we experienced. So today I'll give a little bit of context and background, some of the challenges and some of the opportunities that we found. I'll talk about some of the areas that we're focusing on, and I'll do a bit of a deep dive around quarterly planning and how we've approached that and why. And then I'll talk through about what we managed to achieve on that journey and then some of the key learnings. As Maria said, hopefully there'll be plenty of time for questions at the end, and I really welcome any comments, questions, suggestions that you have as we go through this. Awesome. Okay, so a little bit of background. So obviously Optus has been around in the market for a period of time and is a large organization. I talked through the number of different products that we sell, and over a period of time, our technology landscape has increased. Our organizational elements are quite complex, and different parts of the organization has evolved at different ways over a period of time. And so we're kind of looking into an organization that's full of complexities, not unlike many large organizations that you have to deal with. But that has meant that it makes it quite hard sometimes to be able to deliver effectively. And there's a number of factors that come into that. One, making sure that you can deliver in a way that gets the right outcomes for our customers means that you need to coordinate across a number of different teams, and that will be a theme through this presentation. And then also parts of the organization have gone through different journeys at different paces, and so different ways of working exist right across the organization that we needed to look at and think about where we standardize and where we then adapt our processes to be able to cover these things. So to be able to try and make delivery easier and better across our organization, we kicked off on a multi-year initiative that's really focused on looking at the processes and the tools to enable us to deliver better outcomes for our business and our customers. And there's a number of different elements that come into that I'll take you through today. But our approach really started us looking and saying, what are the things that actually cause friction? Are we really clear on the things that stop us being able to deliver effectively? And then making sure that these are the things that we target. And so the processes and the tools that we've been putting in place are directly related to the friction points that we've seen, and make sure that we kind of target the things that will make the biggest difference earliest. And through that journey, we wanted to make sure that we were very clear about the outcomes that we needed to track through that. And really those three key areas, which was, are we spending our time and our money on the right things? And are we really clear on the delivery outcomes that each of the different elements will give us in the portfolios that we deliver? Are we improving the delivery speed and the reliability of delivery? And then are we improving the experience of that for our people and getting friction out of the way of being able to make sure that we can deliver things well, but that it's an enjoyable experience to go through? So that's background and our mission that came through. So how are we doing that? So our vision is that we are putting together a delivery approach with many frameworks, processes and ways of working, and automation supported by tools. That's what we're trying to put together. And our areas of focus are thinking about how we plan and prioritize in the organization. How do we do that effectively? And if you think about that, there's very different sets of cadences that we have to look at. So everything from yearly planning, where we set a strategy for multi-years and then break that down on a year-by-year basis to the three key things that we need to do as an organization. What we need to do over each of the different quarters, and making sure that the plan adapts for any changes that have to happen as we progress on that. And then as the teams need help and support through their journey through a quarter, have we got the right things in place to support these teams? Delivery process is another key thing. So one of the elements that we know as a complex organization is there's multiple different things that we have to deliver. They can range for incremental changes that happen, and you would go through a certain process for that, to fairly large integration projects, bringing in new technologies or launching brand new products. And there's a certain set of processes that we knew we would need to do to cover these kinds of projects, compared with some of the smaller changes. And so understanding that one size doesn't fit all, and that we need different processes in place is another area that we've been looking into, and making sure that we have the right things in place to help our people. Having the right governance so that we can track how things are going on delivery, and make sure that we've got the right help in place for when things go off track, and make sure that we're not wrapping our teams up in overloaded governance processes, but we do check all the right things to make sure that we deliver things safely and securely, and that we have the right tools in place for our teams. Making sure we rationalize that down and give the teams the best of breed tools to be able to help them on that journey was really important. And then supporting teams with the right training and capability uplifts so that they have all the right skills for their jobs that they need to do, and we can help them on that journey. So lots of areas of focus that we've done on. I am not going to go through all of our journey on each of these today, but we will come back and hopefully tell stories about the elements that we've improved on a number of these different things over time. The one thing we did want to talk about was there was one specific process that we put a lot of focus on, which was quarterly planning. And there was a whole bunch of reasons for that. We saw a whole bunch of delivery issues and problems related to the fact that teams weren't aligned on the missions. And so that area of focus was something that we've incrementally improved over the last number of quarters, and it's something that I'm going to do a deep dive into over the course of this presentation. So the challenges, why was quarterly planning so important? So we recognized that coordinating our teams effectively was critical to improve delivery results. Why was this? So most of the significant delivery that we're doing, if we were launching new products or making changes to any of the key systems, it generally involved multiple teams, and the coordination between the multiple teams was a really important part of making sure that delivery was successful. It also meant that we were making changes to multiple systems that were often administered by partners or internal teams or some of our vendors if it was SaaS-based products. And so making sure that when we were setting off to deliver something that we had everybody coordinated to be able to do the right work, and we had everybody lined up for the next quarter on that mission was highly important. In complex technology environments, the ability to actually completely remove these dependencies and have everybody working within one unit, we find is very hard. We've got a large landscape, we've got vendors that are very specific to certain jobs and roles. And so be able to have teams fully autonomous wasn't something that we're able to get to. So that coordination has been absolutely vital. And then identifying where there was choke points, so areas of teams that didn't have the capacity to work on all the things that we needed to do over that quarter was critical in making sure that we actually had effective delivery through our systems. And so when you looked at a number of the different deliveries and areas where things were delayed, a number of key things came up which caused that, and a lot of them related to the fact that the resources hadn't been lined up, there wasn't enough capacity in this particular team, this team hadn't had a different set of priorities from the other ones. And so we knew by resolving some of these things up front, we would get more reliable delivery and make sure that we were able to deliver the strategy much more effectively. So that was kind of point one. The second point and challenge was that we knew our context would change as well. So you have a plan at the start of the year, you have the mission about where you want to go, but you know that new things come in. This could be, and a good example of this for us was we won a couple of fairly major deals in the first quarter, which require teams to mobilize behind them and make sure that we will be able to deliver against these things and the commitments that we signed up to. So we know we always needed to have our plans change and we needed to be able to adapt to them. And we needed to do that effectively. And so we needed the right mechanisms right across the board to be able to prioritize and rank the work. So we knew what the right priority was, but we also knew the things we would have to stop. Probably one of the most common things, and I'm sure you've all found this as well, is that prioritization can often be the things that we need to do, and that's a priority, and we forget to stop the things that we need to stop to be able to accommodate that. And a common thing that we found was overload of work in the system and teams not being able to keep up with these things, which caused delays. And so making sure we had the right level of prioritization, we could have that transparency about what the right priority was, and we could stop things and make some decisions was vital to this. And to be able to do that effectively across a complex organization, we needed the processes and tools to be effective to allow us to do that. So there were the two principal reasons. And so we knew this was a set of processes that we needed to factor in, and then we needed to run improvements across. So how did we approach it? So there was a number of things that we targeted and we looked at. So one was right at the start of the quarter, we set the process off and we knew that we needed to get real clarity from the top level execs on, are any of the context changed? Has anything shifted from our priorities that were there last quarter? Has anything new happened in that we need to react to? And be very clear about what the most important priorities were. Some of the mechanisms we put in place was then tagging and tools to be able to identify these critical things, and we called them platinum, and made sure then that the rest of the work we had ranking behind it so we could effectively understand what was the most important things and then what were the least important things. Because when you make decisions, you want to make sure that that's consistent and that the rigor is being put in place for that. And so we drove certain tooling changes to make sure that all of the work was in a set of tools that we could rely on, and we rolled out a portfolio management tool, from the Atlassian suite, to be able to help us enable that. We also then started to get the teams, and this is still a journey, to forecast consistently. And so progressively, we've been adding more and more teams to that tools, and other teams we've been hand-holding to help them on that journey. But consistently forecasting for that quarter, identifying where the crunch points were, meant that we could upfront tackle some of the key issues and problems that we could see would arise if we didn't deal with them and make some decisions that had to be made. And so the capacity contentions that the team found through that process needed to be highlighted, and then we could then go through a process of trying to resolve these, or then raise them up to the executive if we needed some help. And then the resolution of these things could be more resources for that particular team, or a reprioritization of other work to be able to help accommodate that. All the way through this, what was really, really important was clear reporting with all of the right information so we can make decisions effectively. So that, again, emphasis on single source of truth with the right processes and reporting on it was critical on our journey. But as was effective facilitation of the meetings. And so this whole process only worked because we had then a sharp process of being able to sit with all of the different groups, understand the data, understand the constraint points, and make sure we resolve these things through. So a particular call out, I think Kate Piper is on the call today as well. Kate, I'm doing all the talking here, but Kate did all the hard work on this process to make it effective, and I'll come to this kind of in the achievements, but we really saw a difference in the effectiveness of that process and the ability to make calls, and then the real kind of lineup of our teams on the mission that we had ahead for a quarter, which was a huge journey for us. I'll talk through this slide. So this kind of really then starts to show how we laid out the process for the teams. And so there was 4 key phases that we went through. The first phase was about all the teams preparing, and they do this constantly through the quarter. So as and when they look at things that they need to do, initiatives, and where they would have reliance on their teams to build it, whether it was from an infrastructure perspective or a product that we're rolling out required an application or some digital work done, we're continually putting that into a single source of tool, our portfolio management tool, and then tagging the teams whose capacity we may need over the next quarter. The teams then, and we expanded this from original quarterly planning that looked at a small subset of the teams to over 30 areas and tens and tens of teams that sat underneath this. But all of the teams then put their capacity into the tool as well. And so that really looked across their area and said, this is how many resources we've got, and this is how much work they're able to go through. And so that was loaded up into the tool. Then we went through with the execs, as I mentioned, and we reviewed the priorities, and we looked at all the work that had been loaded in and said, okay, what is the ranking from top to bottom of these things? What's the most important items? And so then that was put into the review through the review process so that we had a real good base of data. The next phase then is to move into the line and prioritize. And so this is where the teams forecast the work effort that was going to be needed for each of the different items. And then that allowed us to immediately start to see where teams were oversubscribed, where there was choke points, and then start to work out what these teams were also working on, and start to work out if we could resolve that by delaying certain things, or whether or not we needed to increase resources or reshuffle the overall plan. And so the contentions were raised up, we worked through these, we made certain calls, and then we moved into finalization, which was finalizing the plan with all of the teams lined up with a clear view of the priorities and what we needed to deliver over the next quarter. There's a number of things that we've used to support this, and the box down the bottom on this slide kind of talks them through. So we needed the right mechanisms to highlight the top priorities and stack rank them. So that was done by tooling and processes to make sure we could identify these things and tag them. We needed a lot of standardization of processes and common tooling to be able to do this effectively. And then we recognized that even though we're doing this on a quarter by quarter basis, which was a good kind of mechanism to make sure that we're lined up for a number of weeks, that things change even within quarters. And so we also have processes that we've put in place to say, once the plan changes and once we realize actually this is going to take us much longer than there, we've also got mechanisms through weekly escalation sessions, etc., with our exec to make these decisions and improve that process over time as well. Hard to read these screens, but I'll not attempt to zoom in, but I will move my mouse over a couple of things and talk about some of the stuff. So these are some of the tools that we rolled out. This is a tool called Jira Align. It's one of the Atlassian suites, and we kind of rolled this out to make sure that we had some consistent way of articulating the capacity for each of the different teams. And so each of the different teams would plug in how many people they had for that particular quarter, where they needed to put buffer in because of certain events that were happening, what the capacity was across there. And so this then resulted in an area called member weeks, which was how much capacity for a particular team member that we had for that particular quarter. We had all of the elements that we needed to work on, then progressively put into the tool and then tagged against the team. So the team knew the demand that was on them from programs, projects, or initiatives that were happening across the business. And so we had a full view of the work that was coming in there. And then for each of the different teams or squads that are across the top, and for all of the work that's been tagged against them, the tool allowed them to forecast how much work was going to be spent on them, and then immediately identify when the team was over capacity, so it could be raised up and lifted up for capacity contention meetings. So progressively through this process, we put tooling in place to help enable the teams do this in a standardized way and allow us to continue to progress on that and show all work visible. We then were extracting this information and then merging it with some of the areas that weren't as yet mature in terms of the capacity processes and creating reports. And this was a report that we used in the executive meetings or the leadership team meetings to then resolve any of the contentions. And what was really important about this was this tool and the supporting data underneath it made these sessions really, really effective. So all of the time, or at least 90% of the time, was talking about how you solve the problems and not about what's this team doing, where's the data, I don't understand this, which allowed us to get through this process and really resolve a number of the issues and problems that we needed to address as part of the planning process. So point one here on the screen here showed all of the initiatives. And you can see on the right-hand side, it showed where there was capacity issues. So that top initiative there had 5 teams can do the work that was needed for it. Other areas had 4 teams, etc. It allowed you then to select each of the different initiatives and then show in this right-hand panel that's marked as 2, what teams had problems being able to deliver against that particular initiative. And so it showed very clearly the teams that had capacity constraints and the problems we needed to deal with. And then in the bottom, it allowed us on the same screen to then bring up that team and show all of the other work that they had prioritized above this particular initiative that they were having to spend their time. So quite effectively through the meeting, you could see the issues, which initiatives we needed to focus in on. You could see the teams that were constrained and weren't able to deliver against them. And you were able to then very clearly see the other work and make discussions and debates about saying, could we reprioritize some of these other things to allow this to be resolved? And so that allowed us to effectively go through and resolve a number of the different capacity issues and make sure that there was only a few that were left to be able to resolve at that executive level. So what was achieved? So the visibility of work, so having a common set of tools and processes to make sure at the start of quarterly planning, we said, if your work's not in this tool, and you're not indicating that this is going to be needed, then we aren't going to be talking about it. So that really drove work getting in the tool, and that increased visibility of the things that we needed to look at ahead of the quarter. It meant that we were identifying early in the quarter the constraints that otherwise would have happened through escalations or teams hitting capacity constraints during the quarter. And so identifying them and resolving them was key to make sure that the teams were lined up for success. We made decisions, and so the great thing is that when you're adding new priorities in place and you have to absorb work, it was showing these are the capacity constraints that this is going, and we couldn't walk past them. These were the things that we needed to resolve. So that forces into stopping work. These are the things that we can't do. These are the things that we will delay by a quarter, and setting expectations so that we didn't run into them later. And it also allowed us to examine whether or not certain key teams were always the ones that hit these capacity constraints, and we really needed to look at the increased resourcing that we needed to put into these teams to allow us to not have that as a choke point. It improved the efficiency of this process. So what would happen generally over a long period of time, the team worked really hard to make it really efficient, and that was a combination of the process steps and the tools that we put in place. And then moved the conversation, as I mentioned, from lots of questions about the data and why and what to actually understand the problem, what are we going to do as a group to resolve these. And we managed to expand this across the majority of the organization. And so from what was happening really well in a couple of pockets of areas, we're now kind of progressively improving this rigor around thinking ahead, making sure we've lined up on the right priorities, and making sure that we deliver the best for our business and our customers. So some key learnings. So we identified quarterly planning as being a critical enabler to try and improve delivery. And so that was our focus, and we focused on what outcomes would it drive, and we went after that because we knew that was one of the key things that caused delays in programs and projects over time. That's going to be different from everybody's, depending on your context and your organization. And so probably the first key learning I want to call out was focus clearly on outcomes specific to your context, the things that you need to tackle based off of the analysis you've done in terms of the friction points. And for us, quarterly planning was a key one. It's not about predefined playbooks of you can do all this. The context of the organization is huge. I think the second key learning was that one size doesn't fit all, particularly in complex organizations where you've got various different types of products that you need to roll out and different ways of working. And so through the quarterly planning, we recognize this, but through some of the other areas like our delivery pathways that we're looking at, we also recognize that many different groups deliver in different ways, and one size doesn't fit all in terms of saying you have to deliver in a particular way. That doesn't work for complex organizations in my experience. And so understanding where we force standardization and then where we give license to accommodate different ways of working is really important. The next one is don't underestimate the importance of tools. And so quite often I challenge myself. I was going, okay, this is people, process, and then the tools is the last thing. But actually in this journey, the tools and making sure that we had transparency and standardization was actually one of the key unlocks. Absolutely, tools should always come last. But when you know you've got a big tunnel to dig, don't hold back and get the digger. Don't turn up with a spade. It's like sometimes you just have to move forward and kind of get that alignment across each of the different areas. And we really found that actually the rollout of the tool and making that single source of truth was one of the critical enablers to this process. The next one is change is hard, and that was a specific journey on this as well, which and there's a few instances that reminded me of this. Even just subtle little changes that I thought were moving away from percentage allocation of our teams to using member weeks was actually quite challenging for the people that were taking on the process. And it reminded me that sometimes I'm looking across these things and it's my focus all day trying to get these processes to work. But the teams that you roll these out to in complex organizations, this is only a small part of their day. They've got other things that are taking their grey matter in terms of their brain space or what they're having to do. And so anything that you change could be quite impactful, and never underestimate the amount of change support that's needed. And so on our journey through quarterly planning, what I thought was a fairly simple ask to go move from doing it this way to this way took about 3 or 4 meetings with the early adopters of this process, and that was hard. And so we learned a lot from that, and that made it made us realize the amount of change support that we needed for the wider process, and then made us scale back how quickly we wanted to roll it out to everybody. And so we took the right bite-sized chunks quarter by quarter to incrementally improve that. And that brings us on to the last thing, which is the method we used was start small. So find really the lead people that wanted to drive this. And we found a couple in our organization that really embraced the tool and wanted to move through the process. We learned, as I mentioned in the last part of the last lesson, through that process. And so then we followed that up with a number of fast followers and then scaled it, and scaling still happening, but we scaled a large way in the last quarter, and we're seeing a lot of the benefits that are coming through around it. So these were kind of the key learnings that we found through this process, and some of the other things that we're working through. So that's kind of the deep dive on quarterly planning that we wanted to go through. I mentioned at the start we're on a journey across a number of different areas, and so I'm really hoping we come back fairly soon with another few learnings, lessons on some of the other elements that we're rolling out. But that's a big thank you from me today for listening, and I'm really open to questions and discussion on what I've presented today.